Being a sword collector, we run into one of the silliest first world problems that there is, and that is you want to use the sword, but at the same time, you don't want to. What I really mean by that is a lot of the swords I purchase, I have an aspect of the aesthetics of the sword in mind, or something that I like about it. And when you're using a sword, ultimately it will eventually wear down, and aspects will degrade as it gets used and used and used. And so to kind of counter that, it's nice to periodically buy a sword that is the bare bone basics. That is something that is functional and can be used functionally, and you don't really feel bad using it. And I think I have the perfect example of a sword like that right here with the Ronin Katana European arming sword. The Ronin Katana Euro number 1 is a medieval European arming sword. Has a blade of 1075 spring steel. The guard and pommel are of steel, and the cord-wrapped grip is overlaid with black leather. The sword has a hex nut assembly on the pommel that allows for the sword hilt to be easily tightened or disassembled for maintenance and customization. The sword comes with a wood core scabbard overlaid with black leather. The scabbard has an integrated sword hanger that can be adjusted or removed with a pair of brass buckles and straps, as well as an adjustable leather sword belt with brass buckle. Here are the specifications of the Ronin Katana Euro number 1. Probably the most notable aspect is the weight. Bare bones does not even begin to describe this sword, but that is by design. This sword is not meant to be the most aesthetically pleasing sword. It is meant to just be a functional sword, one that you can use. And honestly, from my standpoint, not feel too bad if it gets nicks and scratches over time. I will make notes about some of the aesthetics, though. Specifically, I find the triple fuller to be a very interesting design aspect that you don't always see in an arming sword. And I will also note that the leather-wrapped handle, the quality of the leather is not real high, and it actually has the look and feel more of a rubber pipe insulation that looks like it's been wrapped around. But overall, it serves its purpose to just kind of be a part of the sword and do what it's supposed to do. Yeah, everything is very generic looking in this sword, and again, by design. I do think it's interesting that it's not peened, it's a hex nut assembly, and that is actually there so you could swap out the blade for other things. You can see this in some other swords. I know Hanwei long swords, both blunt and sharp, they have a long sword that you can do the same type of thing. And I think it's really meant so you can customize it. The blade is the blade, and it's really the most important part of this sword. But you can swap out the hilt assembly and make it look like something else, even custom fit your own pieces. So I think that's a really kind of cool feature of it. But overall, yeah, aesthetics, it's bare bones. It is the most basic thing. But it's also a fine looking sword. There's not a lot of imperfections in the execution of the design. Well, if it doesn't have aesthetics going for it, then what it probably does have going for it is the functionality. And it certainly does meet my functionality requirements. In fact, it exceeds it in one aspect, and that is the weight. Usually arming swords are actually pretty heavy comparative to this one. This one coming in at 1.8 pounds, it's very, very light. It performs very well because it is so light. And actually you can see that in the cut test. I was able to make very, very quick strikes with it, very controlled strikes, mostly because it's very light for being an arming sword. And usually arming swords are probably between a half pound and a pound heavier. I will note that because of the kind of lack of robustness in the hilt components, the balance point is shifted a little bit further away from the crossguard than I would normally expect, probably by a good 2 inches. And that's not too bad, again, because it's not so heavy. It doesn't feel too bad, but it is something to note. But yeah, overall, from a functionality standpoint, this is actually exactly what you'd want out of an arming sword. I will say that I feel like the blade is a little bit thin, especially in the distal taper as you get closer to the tip. I would like to maybe see a little bit more robustness, considering how an arming sword is usually going to clash against things like shields and armor. You would know that that strike would be something that the sword would have to kind of stand up against, and when it's a thinner blade, it can almost feel like it might be a little bit too whippy. But that said, the blade is actually also a lot less flexible than you'd normally expect. It takes a lot of effort to actually kind of bend the blade a bit, and so it kind of has this kind of weird mishmash of features where normally you would expect a thinner blade with a thin distal taper to be a lot more flexible, but it isn't. But at the same time, it's robust and it springs back, and it's not going to break on you. So it's kind of this weird thing. And from a perspective of an arming sword, while it lacks robustness, it more than makes up for it in the fact that it's light. It feels very good in the hand, and overall, I feel like I can trust it as a good sword. So functionality-wise, it's good. As I prepare to give this sword a score, I'm going to put a lot of caveats into this kind of conclusion section. Again, because this sword is function over form, and it is purely a functional sword and very little going for it aesthetically, I do feel the price point might be a little bit high. However, the fact that it does come with a halfway decent scabbard, it's not the best scabbard, but a halfway decent one, and with the entire belt, you're basically getting an all-in-one package for the price. Now, $250 isn't a bad price point for a good functional sword, but I would also expect a little bit more out of the sword itself aesthetically, and out of the overall design and implementation. And because I have some concerns about robustness, that just that much further kind of drives my concern. But I did buy this sword at a half off price, and this is where, as I lead into giving the score, I'm going to kind of give my rationale behind it. I will review at MSRP. I will review at the price that it was actually set at. The fact I got it, for half off, it won't affect the overall score. But the reason that it's going, or that I got it for half off, is actually because this line, this sword, and the other kind of three that are part of Ronin Katana's European line is actually being discontinued, and they are preparing to do a new iteration that takes in a lot of the complaints and concerns that people have brought up about these swords. And my hope is that their new iteration, the price point won't change drastically, but the value that you get from the purchase will be better. And so while normally I'd be really tempted to not give this, even a 3 out of 5 because of the price point and what you're really getting for it, at the same time, I think Ronin Katana is showing a lot of promise. And I think that the fact that they are going to be doing iterations and they're going to try to make things better speaks volumes about kind of their first attempts at getting into the European sword market. So with that said, this particular package at $250, I think, is actually a fairly decent deal, especially for a sword that you feel like you can use and not be too concerned about damaging, over time. And so here it is. It is the Ronin Katana Euro #1. It's also just a European arming sword, but I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. But that's with the caveat that I expect that their future offerings will be of a higher quality at a not too much inflated price point.